In 1974, Jim Henson appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, performing a few select segments with fellow puppeteer and artist Frank Oz. One skit included two puppets lip-syncing to Louis Prima and Keely Smith's That Old Black Magic.
Oh, in a spin, love in a spin, I'm in, under the old.
This wasn't the first time Henson performed this routine. By that point, it was a tried and true bit dating back to the 1950s.
In a spin, love in a spin, I'm in.
However, it was the first time audiences would get a glimpse of the puppet that would eventually become known as Miss Piggy. Fast forward 50 years, and Miss Piggy has become a celebrity unto herself. She's led television specials, written books, sold calendars, appeared on talk shows, and even been the subject of an enthusiastic Oscar campaign for Best Actress. 50 years is a long time to stay relevant, let alone beloved, which begs the question, how has she, or the puppeteers behind her, done it? What did Miss Piggy signify upon her debut, and how has she evolved over time in response to a changing entertainment industry? In this video, I'll try to answer those questions and more, specifically taking a look at how her persona draws directly from classic Hollywood and why I think bringing her into the modern age has been so challenging. This video isn't entirely comprehensive, and I'm sure the most fervent Muppet fans will have a thing or two they'd want to add, but I hope to offer an overview that does the diva justice. There's a scene in the 1948 film Easter Parade in which Fred Astaire, playing a Broadway star in need of a dance partner, bets he could take any one of the girls in a random bar and make her a star. He walks over, and who should be in the chorus but Judy Garland? We know, because we recognize Judy Garland, that character surely doesn't belong in the chorus, that it's only a matter of time before she makes it big. That's what it's like watching Miss Piggy in the first season of The Muppet Show. Take the title sequence, for example. She appears twice, once at the beginning in a line of chorus girls, and again at the end. She's definitely there, recognizable to us in hindsight, but in 1976, not yet the icon she would eventually become. That she would become an icon at all was far from inevitable. Puppet designer Bonnie Erickson was sculpting a generic girl pig character for a skit called Return to Beneath the Planet of the Pigs in the 1974 special The Muppet Show, Sex and Violence. Don't worry, we will come back to that title. When Jim Henson asked her to craft a more glamorous version that he could use for some television appearances. That Tonight Show clip that opened the video, and a sketch on a special hosted by trumpeter and music producer Herb Alpert.
We quickly threw on a new outfit for the pig. I went to the eye drawer. I got some big eyes. I found some wigs, some better than others, I've noticed in the photographs that we've been looking at. And I quickly threw on a satin dress. And because I didn't have time to make new hands, because originally she had hooves, I just wired some gloves. She was named after Peggy Lee when I realized that I could give her a name. And that was because I felt she was a very strong woman, very, had an opinion, was very talented. And I loved calling her Peggy Lee until our attorney said, maybe we'll drop the Lee part.
Piggy, come on in here, Piggy. Herbie, I'd like you to meet Piggy. Piggy doll, this is Herbie, baby. This is your letter to success, Piggy doll. I've been telling him all about you.
Hello, Mr. Alpert.
Beautiful, beautiful. She doesn't just say.
And so the icon we know was born. Kind of. Miss Piggy made her appearances and was quickly converted back into the generic pig form with those beady little eyes for the Muppet Show, Sex and Violence. Right, so about that title. In the early 1970s, Jim Henson wanted to develop a variety show for the Muppets and shopped the idea around to various networks. However, network executives were hesitant, believing that because Henson had created Sesame Street, every puppet act he made was meant for children, and that wasn't quite right for primetime. So Henson produced two specials that served as pilots of sorts, meant in part to demonstrate that the Muppets could be mature and subversive enough to entertain adults too. The Muppet Show, Sex and Violence, wasn't as controversial as it sounds in substance, but the title was intentionally provocative, with the show itself parodying the proliferation of sex and violence on TV and each of the 7 deadly sins as characters in the show.
Am I late?
Unfortunately, the pilots didn't actually convince those executives of anything, and 3 networks turned Henson down. Fortunately, however, Lord Lew Grade, a former talent agent, stepped in and agreed to produce and distribute a show from the UK, offering Henson not only financial backing, but also the use of Elstree Studios in England. Henson agreed, and they were off.
It's the Muppet Show with our special guest star, Miss Rita Moreno.
At some point during the transition from Sex and Violence to The Muppet Show, Henson and company must have decided that this Piggy had more potential than this Piggy. So the nice wig went back on, and so did her blue eyes. That said, it's not as if they had a grand plan for Miss Piggy at this point. She had no concrete persona, no dedicated puppeteer, and, as you might have noticed by the few clips I've shown already, no consistent voice. In fact, throughout the first season, her voice is interchangeably done by Frank Oz and Richard Hunt, sometimes within the same episode.
My aunt has a chest that goes back to 1700.
Wow, well, must make it tough on your uncle.
Oh, how kind my Kermit is, not wanting me to overshadow Lena Horne.
The Muppet Show utilizes an on-stage, backstage structure. We watch the characters perform in sketches on The Muppet Show, but follow them behind the scenes and watch them prepare for those same sketches, communicate with each other, and get to know the guest host. It's a genius device, at once making space for some truly wacky, one-off individual numbers, while also allowing the audience to gain affection for the characters as they get to know their quirks more intimately backstage. In season 1, Miss Piggy appears in a number of on-stage recurring sketches, including At the Dance, in which various partygoers dance in front of the camera, delivering quick one-liners with charming but corny wordplay. She plays Nurse Piggy in Veterinarian's Hospital, a parody of medical soap operas with Rolf as a doctor who speaks almost exclusively in puns.
She's right, I saved over 500 last year.
What, patients?
No, dollars.
She also features frequently in panel discussions, sketches in which Kermit and his guests would debate a question of the day, which was rarely answered before the group descended into madcap antics. Broadly speaking, however, the moments that actually developed Miss Piggy's persona into what we recognize today happened in the backstage plot-driven scenes. Those sketches established the central tenet of Miss Piggy's character. She is obsessed with 2 things: show business and Kermit. She angles for a better role or bigger billing.
Miss Piggy, the gifted and glamorous, beguiling, sensuous, and sensational star of the Muppet Show.
Good.
She flirts with Kermit or becomes wildly jealous of anyone who gets his attention instead of her.
Oh, that's okay. I'm doing it with Miss Mousy.
At first, these facets of her personality come across as rather surface level, as if they sort of just decided, okay, this character's thing is that she's hopelessly in love with Kermit, and he's not into that.
I want to make you happy.
Good.
When you're happy, the pig is happy.
But eventually, as Frank Oz spent more time portraying the character, he came upon an idea that would give Miss Piggy immense depth and stirred the curiosity of audiences around the world, opening up the potential of who Miss Piggy could become.
In rehearsal, I had a scene with Kermit, and I was supposed to slap him, and for some unknown reason, I karate chopped him. And that just created Piggy for me, because she is really a truck driver underneath.
By the show's second season, Miss Piggy had ascended the hierarchy of characters, with a new and improved intro reflecting her status, plucking her out of the chorus and placing her at Kermit's literal right hand. The more frequent and complex Piggy's appearances on the show became, the more critics attempted to outline her rapid rise and widespread appeal. Many of them defined Miss Piggy by comparing her to actresses from the golden age or classical era of Hollywood. For example, Elliot Sorkin wrote in Film Comment, "The stately reserve of the Garsons and the Shearers, the demure constraint of the de Havillands and the Deborah Carrs are well within Miss Piggy's range, but she is, above all, a sister in that exclusive sorority that counts among its members Garland and Holiday, Magnani and Moreau, Bankhead and Bernhardt, and of course, Davis. One critic quoted in People magazine wrote, "Miss Piggy combines the explosiveness of Anne Bancroft, the vulnerability of Judy Garland, and the soul of Greta Garbo in a body that drives men mad." There's always something a little tongue-in-cheek when talking about Miss Piggy, particularly about her sex appeal. But the truth is, these quotes are right on the money, because, in my eyes at least, Miss Piggy is a wholesale caricature of the classic Hollywood diva, lampooning the dynamics and standards of stardom. From the way she moves to the way she responds to threats, Miss Piggy is the ultimate reflection of Hollywood ambition, obsession, and glamour run rampant, and it's absolutely fantastic.
The part shall be played by moi.
By you, Miss Piggy?
Yes.
Interviews with the creative minds behind Miss Piggy confirm that the actresses and films of classic Hollywood inspired them when developing the character. After Oz became the primary puppeteer for Miss Piggy, he devised an origin story for her, a 4-page Stanislavskian biography that informed how she saw the world. "As I see her," he said, "she's had a couple of different affairs before Kermit. She was lonely, she was hurt very badly, and she'd rather not talk about it. She was hurt in one affair very badly, and I think her mother mistreated her, and her father died in an accident on the farm. She left home after her mother noticed that Miss Piggy was getting more attention from people than she was. So Miss Piggy left home, began fending for herself, and entered a lot of beauty contests. She tried to threaten the judges beforehand, but she wouldn't sleep with them. She's a lady. She won 2nd or 3rd place a lot. She survived on the prize money for a while, and when that ran out, she really had to struggle."
That you first learning this, Kermit?
Well,
that you know that your fiancée, your girlfriend, left home as a teenager after graduating from charm school? That her first job was at a department store selling gloves?
I'm proud of that. I was alone. I was single. I'm proud of that.
Okay. As a model, she was forced to pose for certain ads. One for a bacon product.
I'd rather not talk about that.
That's outrageous. You never told me that stuff, Piggy.
Okay, Kermit.
Something a woman sometimes has to do.
The story Oz invented reads like it came out of Photoplay magazine in 1938 or 1954, describing women like Marilyn Monroe, Joan Crawford, or Clara Bow, themselves the subject of thinly veiled origin story films like The Goddess and Inside Daisy Clover.
The story of a woman who became a movie star.
I make $4,000 a week now, Ma. Do you know that?
I'm not staying on this farm!
A more comic version of Piggy's past would be told in the Muppet movie in 1979, which chronicles how the main cast of characters first met up with Kermit and made their way to Hollywood. We encounter Miss Piggy in the Bogan County Beauty Pageant, a crown she obviously wins with ease.
This year's Miss Bogan County, Miss Piggy!
And just as she's crowned, she spots Kermit in the crowd and is transported into a fantastical dream sequence in which she imagines her romantic life with him, each vignette offering its own glossy escape, again drawing from cinematic references like Tom Jones. Some of Piggy's most famous sequences, like this introduction in the Muppet movie, are absolutely littered with specific references that the writers, costume designers, and the rest of the Henson team explicitly included to evoke classic cinema, specifically musical comedies from the 1930s and 40s. The Great Muppet Caper from 1981, for example, includes 2 such numbers for Piggy. The first, a dining room dance sequence inspired by the 1935 film Top Hat, which casts her as a Ginger Rogers-type figure. The second, a water ballet inspired by $1 Million Mermaid, in which Piggy takes up the Esther Williams role. The TV special, The Muppets Go to Hollywood, gives her an introduction echoing one of the most iconic entrances in all of cinema, one quite literally made for royalty, an Egyptian parade just like Elizabeth Taylor in Cleopatra. But it's not just these one-to-one recreations of cinematic moments that make Miss Piggy a reflection of the classic Hollywood glamour queen. It's everything. It's the way she carries herself, her concerns, the things she wears. Consider the physicality Frank Oz gives Piggy. She enters a room and leans melodramatically against the door. She constantly whips her hair from side to side in a huff or swipes it away from her face. She sighs, each one heavy with emotion.
I'm too delicate for show business.
Where acting in the 1970s skewed toward naturalistic, finely detailed performances influenced by the method, Piggy wants to hit you with the emotion first. She wants you to know exactly how she feels, so Oz dials everything up to 100. A performance style so self-evident and big would have been seen as outdated by the 1970s, harkening back to the kind of acting done by actresses trained for early 20th century theater, who relied on highly expressive flourishes to reach the back of the house, or actresses trained in silent cinema who needed striking demonstrative physicality in the absence of dialogue. Your Betty Davises or Gloria Swansons. Variety shows in the 1960s and 70s loved to parody the extremities and bigness of acting in the Golden Age by imagining that the women who acted this way on screen acted this way in real life, believing that they were the distant goddesses that the movie studios sold them as. Carol Burnett provides probably the greatest examples of this. Some of her best remembered sketches are spoofs of films like Mildred Pierce and Gone with the Wind.
Oh, Max! Max, don't let the autograph hounds hurt me, please, Max, please!
This sketch about Sunset Boulevard has the exact same comic logic as a Miss Piggy sketch. An actress is doing the most, none of which is actually justified by her surroundings.
No! No, please don't bother me! No, no! No autographs! No, no, no!
What I love about Piggy's physicality is that it feels like that's what she thinks or has learned an actress is like, and that's why she does it. Oz understands that a young pig trying to escape the farm might consciously put up a veneer of sophistication. Piggy acts the elegant diva and mimics the things she's seen them do on TV, but doesn't understand that nobody actually behaves that way in real life. It reminds me of this scene in the comedy My Man Godfrey. Carol Lombard's character is devastated that her crush isn't returning her affection, so she enters the room just like a distraught Miss Piggy, leaning in doorways, looking dramatically off into the distance, and delivering the most unhinged melodramatic dialogue.
Where do you want the sandwiches served, Irene?
What is food?
Something you eat, silly. You want the sandwiches served in here or don't you?
What difference does it make? Some people do just as they like with other people's lives, and it doesn't seem to make any difference.
And how does her sister respond to her antics? By calling out that she's just acting.
Oh, I remember that pose so well. I learned it in dramatic school. It's number 8, isn't it?
Yeah, that's number 8, all right.
Remember what Frank Oz said about Miss Piggy.
She is really a truck driver underneath.
Yeah.
She has an autograph that's all curlicues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. She had to practice that for weeks.
Yeah.
Because if she actually did her signature,
She puts on airs, but the real Miss Piggy underneath is always perceptible. Her use of French is the perfect example of this. French, the chic continental language. Piggy speaks it to project class and culture that she doesn't actually have. So her vocabulary is humorously limited to words like moi and vous, which she misuses most of the time.
Pardonnez us, everyone.
Pardonnez us, everyone? What's that?
That is French.
When a guest star appears who can actually speak French, she inelegantly tries to get out of this situation to avoid embarrassment.
I just remembered, I have laryngitis. My vocal coach told me not to speak French.
The key to Piggy's comedy is that she is both undercut by reality and simultaneously refuses to be undercut by reality. She believes more than anyone that she is a major star, deserves everything that comes with that status, and couldn't possibly have any flaws that detract from that. Vincent Canby put it this way in his 1981 review of The Great Muppet Caper. She possesses a curious but most winning lack of self-awareness, the kind you sometimes see in miniature poodles that behave as if they were Great Danes. One of her nicest traits is the gracious way she acknowledges compliments that sometimes haven't been given. It's in the confident expectation that they will be given that saves this essentially vulnerable pig in situations that would embarrass a star of lesser stature. Callista Hendrickson, Miss Piggy's costume designer from the late 1970s through the late 80s, told People magazine, "When she looks in the mirror, Miss Piggy sees Twiggy, and you better not forget it. She doesn't try to hide her flaws, she doesn't see them." It's true, her interviews from this time are so whimsically self-assured that you can't help but laugh. She told Vogue in 1978, "My eyes are so beautiful, it's a curse. My fashion advice, wear what suits you. Luckily, everything suits me. I happen to be very fortunate. Everything I put on looks beautiful, but don't ever try to look prettier than me. It's futile." She would never bring up the fact that when most people think pig, they think. But she does know that people think that, which is why she immediately shuts down any and all jokes about mud or bacon or weight, anything that could conceivably offend a pig. Pig solidarity always. Unless, of course, attention is at stake.
Whoopi?
Babe?
Whoopi, I can't hear you. Are you there? Hello?
Oh my goodness, it seems like we've temporarily lost our uplink. Babe?
All right! Yeah! That's one uplink down!
At the same time, the world constantly humbles her and exposes her as someone who aspires to stardom, but apparently hasn't quite made it yet. Something is always just slightly off. Her television specials make this joke all the time. The Fantastic Miss Piggy show opens with a glittering number befitting the major diva she is. Yet as the opening credits roll, we hear Miss Piggy screaming in the back.
Featuring Frank Oz. With guest stars John Ritter, Tony Clifton.
The show is not running smoothly, shattering the flawless illusion she had peacocked in the previous number. In Miss Piggy's Hollywood, a TV special from 1989, Piggy gives a tour of Hollywood's most important spots, one of which is, of course, her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. As she runs through her list of famous peers who share the sidewalk with her, Gonzo reveals her star as a sham.
Whoa, this is great, Miss Piggy. Your star is portable.
This is basically the joke of the entire special. She's constantly thwarted by celebrities who don't know her, things she can't actually afford, and opportunities she can't get, and then improvises to save face. Of course, these jokes require some cognitive dissonance. You have to accept that Miss Piggy isn't actually very famous for the joke to work. And yet, she'd have to be pretty famous to get her own TV special, complete with choreography, celebrity guests, costumes, and dancers. That irony allows the audience to enjoy the aesthetics of glamour without being alienated by it.
She can't sing. She can't tell jokes. She can't dance. She's a pig.
Yeah, she's not attractive.
She's single, but she has this tremendous bravado. The reason she's funny is she covers all the pain.
In spite of the semi-delusional quality of Miss Piggy's confidence, she remains an aspirational figure for a lot of people because of how smoothly she soars through this kind of adversity and how she turns perceived negatives into positives.
She kind of represented something that wasn't typically seen on television, a kind of character that maybe was a little bit too edgy, too assertive for human women to be able to go out there and be.
Human woman. She has a kind of puppet privilege, if you will. Because she is a puppet, she's considered non-threatening, unserious, and therefore allowed to do, say, or be things that might earn real women ridicule. Oz recognized this, telling one reporter, "Miss Piggy is the greatest character of them all. She's got a lot of depth because she's been through a lot of pain. She's been rejected a lot. She has the courage to be coy and vulnerable, bravado and narcissistic at a time when that is not especially okay for women." Her status as a sex symbol certainly applies here.
Like most successful television shows, there is some sex on the Muppets, but the pig is so flamboyant, she's harmless.
Now, the thing Miss Piggy loves most of all, besides show business, is Kermit, with whom she has developed an are they, aren't they, push and pull dynamic, a dynamic with roots that date back to the screwball comedies of the 1930s. As film scholar Ed Sikov wrote, In the 1930s, a whole genre developed around the perverse idea that love could only be enhanced by aggravation. The thornier the relationship, the better. Films like My Man Godfrey, Bringing Up Baby, The Lady Eve, and The Awful Truth served up these battles of the sexes, with strong, love-struck women frantically pursuing passive, hesitant men, their antics becoming more and more absurd and often physically combative. Jane Green continues, the eccentric behavior of the screwball couple is often explained via a lay psychoanalytic reading. The sexual energy suppressed under the watchful eye of the censor finds its expression in an acceptable physical and verbal looniness. By this line of reasoning, the wisecracks, cartwheels, pratfalls, and funny expressions of screwball comedy are both a replacement for and symbolic of sexual desire. Because Kermit and Piggy are unlikely to be portrayed as physically intimate, they are the perfect candidates for this kind of relationship. Piggy chases, Kermit dodges her advances without actually shutting her down, he gives in just a little, she is reassured, and the cycle repeats. And because they're Muppets, the looniness and pratfalls can be dialed up to the maximum. Piggy can karate chop him often. And in highly creative ways.
You're forgiven.
As Marissa Fenley points out in her article about puppet theory, Henson specifically developed characters whose personalities, when paired together, generate gags rather than justify them. For instance, the running gag of Miss Piggy and Kermit's relationship is her attempt to trick him into marrying her, and Kermit's attempts to evade her traps. This gag, however, is constitutive of their relationship rather than an obstacle to their having one. For instance, in Muppets Most Wanted, Piggy discovers Kermit's imposter, Constantine, because the imposter Kermit willingly agrees to marry her. She knows she is reunited with her one true frog when he reliably equivocates at the altar. Miss Piggy's karate chop is as key to her character as anything else. She doesn't slap, the choice mode of aggression for real stars.
What's that for?
I do that in all my pictures.
She chops. It's, to use Oz's term, probably Piggy at her most truck driver, a raw reaction that she cannot suppress and that reveals the real pig beneath the pearls, as impossibly dramatic and stereotypically unladylike as they come. As often as Kermit is the victim of Miss Piggy's violence, he also benefits from it, often playing the damsel in distress who requires Piggy to summon her superhuman martial arts skills to defeat his nemesis. And yes, Miss Piggy did come under criticism from some social workers and psychiatrists who said she was too violent. Piggy occasionally flirts with people besides Kermit, usually guest stars or celebrities whose fame increases their value in her eyes.
Remember in the movie when you held Lois Lane?
Mm-hmm.
Could you use my body as a visual demonstration?
Although, she'd never want Kermit to know that she was interested. She's Kermit's for life, at least until recently, and some of the franchise's most beloved moments involve sincere interactions between the two of them. Kermit finally capitulates, the antagonism dies down for a brief moment, and the audience can enjoy the payoff after a long battle. We can't talk about Miss Piggy as a reflection of old Hollywood without talking about her aesthetics. The sculpt of her face has been tweaked many times throughout the years, though the bones, so to speak, remain the same. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed, voluptuous Miss Piggy was carved in the image of the blonde bombshells. Although in reality, parts of Miss Piggy's original costume were designed by Bonnie Erickson for purely practical purposes.
I would just say that when we went from being beneath the Planet of the Pigs, and they lost their costume and she had to become a little more glamorous for the other piece we did for Herb Alpert, you could see where her neck joined her body. And so the obvious thing to do was to add some pearls right at that point.
Others served to underline Piggy's persona. Her silver satin dress marked her as a more formal, glamorous figure than the rest of the Muppets, and indeed one of the very few feminine characters on the show. It's a flowing, simple number that evokes Halston, a popular designer from the 1970s who himself drew from 1930s aesthetics. Eventually, as she gained momentum as a character, her world became more ornate. A lavish dressing room, a pet dog named Foo-Foo, and costume designer Callista Hendrickson convinced Henson and Oz that Miss Piggy should have a bespoke wardrobe to match.
Frank came from a traditional family of puppeteers where every puppet had their look and their costume, and they didn't change clothes. And if you think of Howdy Doody or puppets that you remember, they always wore the same thing. So I suggested to Frank that because Miss Piggy is backstage and she's an actress, she needs a backstage robe, a kimono, a peignoir, whatever. He agreed to try it out. He made the most of it, as Frank always did. Once he discovered the possibility of the costumes, he really went with it. So that was the first hurdle. And after that, he loved having more costumes. She became more glamorous as the days went on.
The team also developed a number of rules for Miss Piggy's wardrobe, like if she wears a hat, she has to have one ear popping out. Some were, again, derived for her character. Miss Piggy was an aspiring actress who came from the barnyard. She wanted out of that life, so she didn't wear earth tones. Instead, she wore fantastical pinks, purples, and blues, the colors that occur less often in nature. The unnaturalness of Piggy is actually a good transition into Piggy as a camp figure, really as camp incarnate. Film scholar Richard Dyer wrote in his book Heavenly Bodies that when we read stars through a camp lens, we enjoy them not for any supposed inner essence revealed, but for the way they jump through the hoops of social convention. Seeing them that way is seeing them as appearance, as image, in no way asking for them to be what they are, really. Jack Babuschio expands on this in his article Camp and the Gay Sensibility. To appreciate camp in things or persons is to perceive the notion of life as theater, being versus role-playing, reality and appearance. Camp is often exaggerated. When the stress on style is outrageous or too much, it results in incongruities. The emphasis shifts from what a thing or a person is to what it looks like, from what is being done to how it is being done. Miss Piggy is a mass of incongruities. The farm girl who is a movie star, the pig who is a sex symbol, the truck driver telling us she's a princess, the puppet asking us to perceive her as a real speaking being. We implicitly recognize the reality, but choose to admire the image and the effort it takes to maintain that image instead. It's significant that Miss Piggy's two most common states of being are combat or a model's pose. It's a clash of masculine and feminine energies, which Babuschio terms the most common of incongruous contrasts. She constantly shifts between them, yelling at someone with her full chest, then quickly reverting back into her signature pose to reestablish the demure feminine illusion.
Yeah, but if I don't get back to the phone, someone else will use it.
Shut up!
Well,
She fixes her hair right after a karate chop. In that sense, Oz, being the man behind the woman, also adds a drag element to Miss Piggy, a performance of exaggerated gender. Funnily enough, the press did wonder how or why a male performer was able to so thoroughly interpret a female character, and Oz definitely had a few, I like girls moments in interviews in the 1970s. But he was also actually very thoughtful about how those energies lived within him and how that influenced the character. He said in one interview, "Certainly Miss Piggy is the hardest character to do simply because she's the most complex. She has the most depth. It's a hard character for me to do because it brings out my own femininity. It's hard for a guy to project that femininity. I have enough in me to do it, and at the same time, enough masculinity to make me embarrassed to do it around other people. So there's a whole dichotomy there that I think helps the character." Yes, recognizable pop cultural tropes informed who Miss Piggy became. but it's important to recognize how much Frank Oz as a human being influenced who she was. The things he was thinking and feeling, his relationship with Jim Henson, how he thought about women, and what he noticed about the entertainment industry.
When I created Piggy with the writers, I created a very neurotic character. I mean, she has layers of inner conflict, layers. And that was me at that time. At that time, I had tremendous inner conflict with many things. One of which I didn't want to be a puppeteer. I wanted to direct. But I was too scared to say it to myself. Jim, on the other hand, always went with the flow. Always didn't go upstream, didn't paddle upstream. He always went with it, always went. And so that was our relationship in real life, and that tended to be our relationship with the puppets also.
And so Miss Piggy, along with the rest of the Muppets, was launched into superstardom.
Like this, the newest of Hollywood sex symbols is here with us tonight. May I present the most beautiful pig in the world, Miss Piggy!
235 million people around the world tuned in to the show, while A-list celebrities lined up to guest star on television and in the films. Muppet merch became so omnipresent that one journalist remarked, "There are enough Muppet artifacts on the market now to convince future archaeologists that our civilization worshipped frogs and pigs." Miss Piggy became an industry unto herself. Not unlike the studio system, the Henson Company set up an infrastructure to internally manage Miss Piggy's public image. The Muppets resonated, not as abstract pieces of felt, but as real characters, who audiences and critics felt were akin to real human beings. Their films, well, at least the first few, were very well reviewed by critics, in part for their genuine innovations in puppetry that Jim Henson achieved.
I mean, when you think of great moments in cinema, for example, Jolson sings, Garbo laughs, Barrymore talks, Kermit rides a bicycle.
But also for the humanity imbued in the characters. There's more reality in this stuffed animal than in 97% of the characters in so-called real people sitcoms on TV. Charles Champlin wrote in the Los Angeles Times, "The perfection of Muppet puppetry is so complete that it's impossible not to accept these felt creations as feeling beings." It's quite refreshing to see the mainstream critical establishment so firmly in the Muppets' corner. Men you might expect to approach the Muppets with hearts of stone absolutely tripped over themselves to compliment them. Or, to be more specific, to compliment Miss Piggy.
Every time she popped up on the screen, I paid more attention to her and attention to the film. I'm not saying that because I want to be cute or trendy with Miss Piggy. I'm not even the biggest fan of the Muppet Show. But she is a genuine actress in this film. When they flip her upside down, you notice how big her thighs are when she has her lines of dialogue and her fantasy. It's interesting. So I'm recommending the film only for those scenes in which she's on the screen.
Miss Piggy was different from real actresses, not just because she was a puppet, but because she represented unabashed, gaudy glamour in an age when quote-unquote serious actresses weren't inclined to embrace that. And because she appeared in that campy material at a time when Hollywood was disinclined to invest in it. As people who professionally monitor the industry, learn its history, and understand its trends, critics understood Piggy as a nostalgic throwback who filled a gap in the then current roster of stars.
But look at the analysis that we're doing on this piece of foam rubber. I mean, this is why, at least I think you got to grant me that this is a genuine character, and this is what amazed me. As I watched her, I was saying, how many musical comedy actresses who sing and dance do we have? You know, Liza Minnelli doesn't make too many movies. Streisand isn't singing and dancing in the movies lately either. But this pig is, and this pig is interesting.
With critics and audiences so enthusiastically supporting Miss Piggy, it's no surprise that she was at one point actually in the conversation for the Best Actress Oscar. In 1979, after the resounding success of the first Muppet movie, a group of fans from Cincinnati, Ohio, founded the Committee to Award Miss Piggy the Oscar, or CAMPO, demanding the Academy take her seriously as a Best Actress Oscar contender. There are thousands of people in this country who believe Miss Piggy is more deserving of an Oscar than a lot of actresses, one fan said, and they weren't exaggerating. Over 25,000 fans sent letters to the Academy in support of the campaign. Of course, the Academy didn't bite and she wasn't nominated for Best Actress, but she was invited to the ceremony where, of course, she made a meal out of the situation.
Well, I can see you're at a loss for words, and that's understandable. After all, we have the most glamorous and glittering names, the finest actors.
It's because I'm a pig, isn't it?
She and Johnny Carson introduced Best Song, for which Paul Williams and Kenny Asher were nominated for Rainbow Connection.
Ladies and gentlemen, the first nominated song. I wanted the nomination so bad. I worked so hard.
I know you did.
I took out billboards on Sunset.
Don't feel badly about it.
So, if Miss Piggy recycles the tropes and behaviors of movie stardom, what happens when the concept of movie stardom dies? Over the past few years, we have absolutely been inundated with articles musing on the state of the movie star. As the industry has changed with the advent of streaming, the slow death of the theatrical release, the rise of social media, the dominance of and over-reliance on IP, it seems the modern industry doesn't quite need movie stars the way it used to. And whether you think that is something to mourn or not, it absolutely changes the logic of how Miss Piggy would move around in the world. Certainly, some aspects of Piggy's character are timeless. For example, I think the will they won't they screwball dynamic with Kermit will always feel current. But many of the references that originally made her resonate aren't really relevant anymore. It's not as potent of a joke to have her flop against doorways in a parody of the melodramatic actress, because nobody has actually acted like that for decades. It's not part of most people's visual vocabulary anymore, except probably the people who watch this channel. You are truly more likely to see someone parodying the body language of an NPC than you are a 1930s movie star. It's not as if we're lacking parodies of aspiring actresses, but they just don't quite take the same shape today. They're usually awkward comedies of manners, monologues in which the audience has to intuit why the actress would be humiliated, despite what's actually coming out of her mouth. Valerie Cherish from The Comeback is the perfect example.
Oh, no, that's that independent film I did.
Oh, right, with those cute college kids.
Well, they're film school, so it's an independent film.
We know a student film and an independent film are not the same thing, but that she's trying to make the best of it to save face. It's the modern version of a Miss Piggy joke. The age of Instagram and TikTok comedy has also surfaced a number of straight-to-camera characters that achieve the same effect. Like, out-of-work actress talks about a possible sequel to a movie that came out 9 years ago.
I would totally be down to do numero dos. I don't know if they're going to do that or not. There's not really any talk about it, but I just wanted to say, and if anybody, Claire, is listening, Jackson, I would totally like to get together and do that, do a sequel to the movie, because it was so much freaking fun the first time. But yeah, there's no talk. Long story short, there is absolutely no talk about doing another movie.
Other examples. You wouldn't in 2024 invent a character who fake speaks French as a projection of class, because we don't necessarily value those upper crust pretensions the same way. Although, to be fair, it's idiosyncratic enough to be funny regardless. Emily in Paris can't speak French, but everyone knows it. There's no veneer there. And finally, maybe this is controversial, but I don't think we live in a very glamorous era. There's definitely a lot of wealth, but glamour, I'm not so sure. I know some people will say influencers are glamorous, and yeah, they get a lot of free stuff and get to go to parties that are basically advertisements, but like, Betty Davis never had to set up her own tripod. So the question becomes, how do you arrange the details to make Miss Piggy feel modern and not like a stereotype from a bygone era? What should she wear? What kind of physicality should she adopt? What are her show business dreams for an industry where movie stardom isn't even the most lucrative or attention-getting job you can have? How do you answer all of those questions and still stay true to Miss Piggy? There have been a couple high-profile updates that have attempted to answer those questions. In 2004, Disney acquired the Muppets IP from the Henson Company, formed the Muppet Studio, and began looking for new vehicles for the characters. They began with some classic story adaptations and Christmas specials, but eventually found success with the 2011 film The Muppets, which served as a kind of franchise reboot. The film follows a new Muppet, Walter, with his older brother Gary, played by Jason Segel, as they try to get the gang back together to produce a charity event to save their old theater. A classic musical comedy structure that dates back to the Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland musicals of the 30s and 40s. In a parallel to the original 1979 film, Kermit tours the country in a car, gathering up the original crew and getting them ready for the show. Generally speaking, I think this film does a really good job modernizing the Muppets while retaining the things that made them successful in the first place. A Muppet superfan, Segel, who co-wrote the screenplay, really paid attention to the type of humor that made the Muppets unique and so universally appealing. There's a ton of clever wordplay, they constantly break the fourth wall, and poke fun at filmmaking tropes. The only major criticism I would lob at the film is that it centers Walter and Gary, who function well enough as everyman stand-ins for the fans who want to see the gang back together again, but whose centrality means they get a whole lot of screen time. And to be blunt, there is no world in which I would rather see these guys do anything instead of the regular crew. The second film, The Muppets Most Wanted, even addresses this criticism. This film also sets the precedent for the ways Piggy has been adapted in the past decade or so. They dispense with the irony of Miss Piggy as the diva underdog, and instead make her a flat-out diva. Comparing The Muppets 2011 and The Great Muppet Caper can tidily illustrate that change. In The Great Muppet Caper, Miss Piggy arrives at a fashion magazine with the biggest dreams of being a model. She acts like she's a celebrity already, is immediately undermined, but happily accepts an assistant position anyway. She just wants to be around the fashion magazine.
Modeling is my life. It is my destiny. I shall accept nothing less. I can offer you a job as a receptionist.
To impress others, she pretends that her boss's office is her own. In 2011, she's in a managerial position at Vogue Paris. She has her own office, her own assistant, respect, and authority. In 1981, she's Andy. In 2011, she's Miranda Priestley. The analogy is easy to make, given that they literally stunt cast Emily Blunt as her assistant. I wouldn't say that a love of show business drives Miss Piggy's character in these films as it did previously either. She returns to the Muppets out of fidelity to her friends and out of a love for Kermit, not because she craves the stage. The second film, 2014's Muppets Most Wanted, picks up where The Muppets 2011 leaves off, with the gang reunited and on tour performing The Muppet Show. The performance of the actual show really has almost nothing to do with the plot itself, which centers on Kermit's evil Russian twin switching places with him so he can steal Europe's most famous jewels. Piggy's scenes revolve mostly around her relationship with Kermit. Generally speaking, these films want us to take their relationship much more seriously than the previous iterations. Her obsession has transformed into a more formal desire for a mature relationship. This is not a screwball couple. When they get upset with each other, they are genuinely upset and have to work through their emotions. The 2015 Muppet sitcom on ABC, greenlit after the success of the films, shifted things again. With variety shows a virtually dead format, the Muppets came back instead with the 2010s format of choice, the mockumentary, a clear attempt to replicate the success of shows like The Office and Parks and Rec, both of which had recently completed their highly successful runs. In the show, Miss Piggy hosts Up Late with Miss Piggy, a typical late-night show which welcomes weekly guests for sit-down interviews. The rest of the gang are all there too on the staff of the show. Well, except Walter, who was summarily and unsurprisingly dumped, although he did make it into the Lady Gaga Muppet Holiday Spectacular, so good for him. Each of the Muppets take on really intuitive roles. Kermit acts as executive producer, which primarily consists of handling Miss Piggy's demands. Fozzie is a kind of warm-up act. The Electric Mayhem are the house band, etc., etc. The series is a clear attempt to return to Henson's vision of the Muppets as being for adults as much as children, and matures the characters and themes, at least compared to its most recent iterations. This was apparently confusing to some parents who I suppose have no conception of the history of the Muppets. Some parents groups even boycotted the series without ever having seen an episode, of course. As a late-night host, Piggy's ambition is back on display. Although, because she is in a position of authority and has the power to get what she wants to a certain extent, her concerns are largely aesthetic. It's not about dreaming big and masking her shortcomings, as much as it is about maintaining an image she's already won. Her competitiveness is directed toward the guests. She usually plays the underdog to other famous women who appear on the show, like Reese Witherspoon, for example, who, in universe, beat her for an Oscar.
I guess you've been pretty busy since you won your Oscar.
But the underdog status she has with the guests certainly does not apply behind the scenes of the show, where they lean hard into the idea of Piggy as a Miranda Priestley-like boss. There are times when she's just kind of mean, playing the extremity of her ego for laughs. Characters constantly walk on eggshells around her. Delusion and confidence can skew toward arrogance and conceit if taken too far, and this series isn't always adept at striking that balance. The series also threw a major wrench in the Kermit-Piggy dynamic with the introduction of Denise. Shortly before the show premiered, ABC made the genius marketing decision to announce that Kermit and Piggy had separated, and that Kermit was dating a new pig, Denise, from marketing. This caused a frenzy in the media for weeks, with people of all ages taking to the internet to claim their childhood was ruined. I personally think this could have been a really smart way to refresh their dynamic, or at least introduce a little conflict. There are so many examples of screwball heroines triumphantly breaking up boring couples for the writers to draw from. Plus, this wasn't the first time they brought in another female pig to stir things up. In season 3 of The Muppet Show, Annie Sue was briefly introduced to stir jealousy in Miss Piggy.
Now it's the frog's turn!
But like Annie Sue, Denise was a short-lived presence in The Muppets. She breaks up with Kermit because he seems too committed to work, and therefore to his ex, Miss Piggy. The series for me is a mixed bag. The update is necessary, but its execution also has a flattening effect that's hard to ignore. Despite the fact that they are still puppets and therefore incongruous with the human beings and industry around them, they're adhering quite closely to the standards of the mockumentary format, which relies primarily on quiet, private reactions. Think Jim's signature stare into camera. In order to achieve this, the Muppets are played as straight as possible. The outrageousness is dialed down, the campy sense of life as theater tuned more toward life than theater. The result is a much less wacky, slightly more cynical Muppet cast that I think audiences are typically used to, and ultimately it feels less bizarre and experimental than the show from this era it is thematically most similar to, 30 Rock. Actually, Jenna Maroney is, I think, the character who best picks up Piggy's baton in terms of the delusional, ambitious actress trope. A trailer park girl who fought her way close to the top, can't hide the fact that she's a trailer park girl no matter how hard she tries, seethes with jealousy for any competitors, and yearns for any and all attention. Seriously, look up any Jenna Maroney compilation on YouTube, and a not insignificant portion of the clips could 100% work for Miss Piggy.
Why don't you sing something for me?
Oh, no. Nobody wants to hear that.
I do.
Some folks like to get away.
But the new Miss Piggy doesn't even get anything as silly as Muffin Top. Piggy and Kermit's combativeness, stripped of the absurdity and frantic energy of the original Muppet series, no longer feels silly and harmless, but genuinely combative. During the press tour, they appeared on Jimmy Kimmel to promote the series, and throughout the interview, they jokingly insult each other to emphasize the fact that, yes, they've broken up. But it just kind of gets to the point that it feels a little too serious, and Jimmy comments on it.
I have to say, this is genuinely uncomfortable. It really is.
When I first saw this interview, I was glad he made the joke because I wasn't sure if it was just me who was feeling that way. The YouTube channel Mupptown Funk did a deep dive on the sitcom that explains how, during the show's hiatus, a new showrunner came in and the writers regrouped to consciously inject a little more trademark Muppet positivity and goofiness into the show. The efforts at a turnaround didn't quite work, and the show was canceled after one season. Since then, the Muppets have been in a kind of holding pattern, occasionally wheeled out for one-off projects or short things on Disney+. Most recently, The Muppets Haunted Mansion premiered, as did the series The Muppets Mayhem. I have yet to catch either of these, but I heard good things about The Muppets Mayhem, which even won the Emmy for Outstanding Children's Series, and was promptly canceled by Disney, so sick. As good as I think the puppeteers who currently voice Piggy and Kermit and the rest of the Muppets are, it's not hard to think that the franchise lost something in the successive events of Henson's death in 1990, the Disney acquisition, and Frank Oz's departure from the Muppets in 2002. Oz has been vocal about this shift, telling The Guardian he sees a demarcation line between the Jim Henson Muppets and the Disney Muppets. There's an inability for corporate America to understand the value of something they bought, he said. They never understood with us. It's not about the puppets. It's about the performers who love each other and have worked together for many years.
There are people in the TV and motion picture area. The thing is, what they don't understand is that one can't just write for the Muppets. There are performers who've been with Jim for decades.
Yeah.
And they're not being part of the process.
Right.
Those people, Bill Beretta in here, Dave Goelz, they are brilliant. They know the soul. I just wish they would be asked to be part of the creation. And that's what would make a success for Disney, really. So I have nothing against Disney. Jim wanted to go to Disney. If the characters could not be popular without us down below. We know each other for so many years.
Yeah.
You can't just bring a new guy in.
Right.
You just can't do it. And it's also weird because it's like buying a thoroughbred and not letting them race.
Even the current puppeteers will admit to nostalgia for the old days.
I miss the sense of play that comes from a company owned by a person.
When I was researching this video, I obviously was plowing through seasons of The Muppet Show, and I watched the episode guest hosted by Mark Hamill in 1980, just before the release of The Empire Strikes Back. The episode plays out like a Star Wars film, complete with C-3PO, Chewbacca, R2-D2, and Miss Piggy as Princess Leia, of course. The episode ends with the Star Wars and Muppets casts singing When You Wish Upon a Star from Disney's Pinocchio. Watching this, it suddenly occurred to me, these used to be 3 separate companies. 3 separate visions led by 3 genuine innovators who have all now been coalesced into a massive conglomeration that prioritizes brand consistency and shareholders over authorial voices. The industry has only become less inclined to pay artists to create new and exciting material since the days when Lou Grade took a chance on the Muppets when no one else would. In a world where these corporations would rather let AI make decisions about a movie's plot and themes, it's bittersweet to look back at what Henson and Oz and all of their collaborators achieved and remember what is possible when artists are trusted and given the resources they need to innovate. I've thought a lot about what the Muppets represent over the past month. There are so many answers to that question. But the one that stuck with me the most is, and I'm so sorry about how corny this is going to sound, how awe-inspiring creativity is. The finale of the 1979 Muppet movie truly just hits me in the gut. The cast starts singing about how they've been bursting with creativity all their lives, and now finally they have the opportunity to use it. They're just having so much fun collaborating with friends, cobbling together sets, translating everything they experienced en route to Hollywood into a story that will make people happy. It has to be one of the purest, most magical scenes ever put to film. What hits me is that this is how Jim Henson must have felt too. A guy with a dream who cobbled together a ping pong ball and an old coat, infused it with his personality and life experience, gathered together some equally creative friends, and somehow created something that has entertained and delighted audiences for generations. It's so easy in the chaotic mess that is show business to forget how impressive and astonishing that is. If you're leaving this video as amazed by the ingenuity of Jim Henson and Frank Oz as I was while writing it, good. They're genuine innovators who deserve all the hype and admiration they're given. And I'm not the only person who thinks that.
The Muppets, for my money, are the most original thing that ever happened on the box. Don't you agree?
So you want to learn more about them. What do you do next? Well, if you're in New York City, I recommend visiting the Museum of Moving Image, which has a permanent exhibition dedicated to Jim Henson and the Muppets. You can see actual puppets, character designs, even models showing how sets were constructed to hide puppeteers. I would also recommend watching Patrick Willem's recent video about Muppet cinema, which dives into some of the troubles puppeteering has had in the age of CGI. You can watch that right now, ad-free, on Nebula. As you may already know, I'm a proud member of the Nebula family, which means that all of the videos I've made for YouTube are also currently streaming ad-free on Nebula, and everything I make in the future will be too. I love working with Nebula because it's creator-founded and creator-led, meaning creators are encouraged to take risks and make things that they want to make without worrying about how an algorithm will respond, because Nebula doesn't even have one. They're just people curating things they like. What a concept. Nebula prioritizes the audience's experience. That's why when you watch something on Nebula, it is guaranteed to be ad-free. Everything on Nebula, from the originals to classes led by creators you know and love, everything is paid for with subscriptions. So signing up supports my channel tremendously, as well as an entire community of creators. If you sign up using the link in my description, nebula.tv/bkrewind, you can support me directly and get Nebula for 40% off an annual plan. That's just a little over $2.50 a month. And if you think you know someone else who would enjoy Nebula, great news. Nebula is now offering annual gift cards, meaning you can share everything the platform has to offer with your family and friends for a whole year. Use the link gift.nebula.tv/bekindrewind in my description to give a year of Nebula to a friend for just $30. And just so you know, this also applies to people who already have it. They'll get a whole year free, just added into their account. Click the link in my description and start watching.
I'm gonna see my lawyer.
Why?
Gonna find out if you can sue a show for breach of taste.
Oh, please don't make us watch it again.
Know the trick I'd like the frog to do?
What's that?
Make guts disappear.
Did you ever see anything put together worse than that?
Yeah, my first wife.
That's all, folks.